SpaceX dominates the commercial space industry. It launches more rockets than any other company and operates the world's largest satellite constellation. It has redefined spaceflight, slashing launch costs and proving that rapid innovation is possible in an industry that was once controlled by slow moving bureaucracies. However, despite its dominance, SpaceX remains a private company. Investors cannot buy SpaceX stock, nor is there any clear path to an IPO. Elon Musk has been asked about this for years. He's hinted at going public, but always with conditions. He said that quarterly earnings pressure could interfere with long term goals, and he has suggested that only Starlink, SpaceX's satellite internet business, might IPO. He's even admitted that financial constraints could force his hand someday. But today, SpaceX remains privately held, raising billions from private investors while maintaining full control over its future. But will that ever change? Could SpaceX one day go public, joining Tesla and becoming one of the most valuable companies on the stock market? Or will it remain independent, shielded from Wall Street's demands? Today, we're breaking it all down. The reasons for and against a SpaceX IPO and the potential impact on Musk's control, and what it would mean for the future of space exploration. Now, before we dive in, be sure to like this video and to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the space industry. And now, let's get into it. SpaceX is one of the most valuable private companies in the world, with an estimated valuation exceeding $180 billion. And a public offering would unlock massive amounts of capital, allowing the company to accelerate its ambitions. An IPO could raise tens of billions of dollars, fueling the expansion of Starship, the Mars program, and Starlink's global rollout. Investors are eager, and a SpaceX IPO would be one of the most anticipated in history, drawing both retail and institutional buyers. Aerospace giants like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman are all publicly traded, giving them access to consistent funding. SpaceX, despite competing at the same level, has chosen a different path, relying on private investments and government contracts. But as missions grow in scale and in cost, private funding may not be enough. Government agencies like NASA and the Department of Defense already play a key role in SpaceX's business, and if they push for more transparency, then an IPO might become necessary. An IPO could also bring stability. Right now, SpaceX depends heavily on private fundraising rounds. This method is effective but inconsistent and subject to shifting investor sentiment. The public market, while volatile, would ensure a steady flow of capital. And going public would also allow early investors and employees to cash out their shares. Many have been holding on to stock for several years, waiting for a liquidity event, and an IPO would finally give them that opportunity, potentially attracting even more top-tier talent to the company. SpaceX has all the ingredients for a successful IPO. It has strong revenue streams, industry dominance, and a visionary leader. If the company ever decides to go public, then it wouldn't struggle to find buyers. The real question is whether or not Musk wants to take that step, or if he sees it as a risk to SpaceX's long-term vision. Elon Musk has repeatedly dismissed the idea of taking SpaceX public, citing concerns about how shareholder pressure and short-term financial expectations might impede its progress toward his vision. He has seen firsthand how public markets can influence a company's direction. Tesla has faced intense scrutiny from investors demanding profitability, sometimes at the expense of long-term innovation. SpaceX, with its high-risk development cycles and ambitious vision, would not fit well within the constraints of Wall Street's quarterly earnings expectations. Moreover, public companies often face relentless scrutiny. Investors demand predictable revenue, stable profit margins, and reduced risk exposure. SpaceX, by its nature, operates unpredictably. Its rapid iteration experimental projects, and aggressive cost cutting measures would be difficult to reconcile with the cautious numbers driven mindset of public shareholders. And a single failed mission could trigger a stock crash. A delayed Starship launch could lead to shareholder lawsuits, and the freedom to take significant risks would be significantly reduced. Musk's control is another issue. Right now, he owns a large portion of SpaceX and has near total authority over its direction. Going public would mean the dilution of ownership and the introduction of external influences. Even with a dual class share structure, like what he implemented at Tesla, he would still have to answer to a board of directors that represents public investors. Additionally, SpaceX has no urgent need for public funding. It has successfully raised billions in private investment from firms like Google, Fidelity, and venture capital funds. These investors provide capital without demanding quarterly earnings calls or public findings. Meanwhile, Musk has hinted that Starlink, SpaceX's satellite internet business, might go public in the future. If that happens, then it could generate enough capital to sustain SpaceX's broader goals without requiring an IPO for the entire company. But for now, remaining private allows SpaceX to operate with maximum flexibility while unburdened by the constraints of the public market. If SpaceX remains private, then Starlink could become the compromise. Unlike rocket launches, which have unpredictable revenue cycles, Starlink is a consumer facing business with a steady cash flow. Its satellite internet service is already generating billions in annual revenue, and as more satellites are deployed, its profitability will only increase. Meanwhile, Musk has openly discussed the idea of taking Starlink public once it reaches financial stability, and a Starlink IPO would allow SpaceX to raise significant capital without subjecting the entire company to shareholder influence. Moreover, the proceeds from a public Starlink could then be funneled into SpaceX's core projects, including Starship and Mars colonization, effectively using the stock market as a funding mechanism while keeping the parent company private. This approach would also allow investors to get exposure to SpaceX's growth without the volatility of rocket development. Starlink's business model, subscription based and with recurring revenue, is far more predictable than the high risk, high reward nature of launch services. It would be an attractive stock for institutional investors who might be hesitant about a pure play spaceflight company. So, by separating Starlink from SpaceX, Musk could maintain tighter control over his long term vision while still accessing public markets when needed. This strategy would mirror how Tesla uses its energy business as a secondary revenue stream in order to support its larger goal of electrification. But for now, Starlink remains part of SpaceX, and Musk has stated that an IPO will not happen until cash flows become stable. But if SpaceX ever needs public funding, then a Starlink IPO may be the most practical first step. Now, consider what would happen if SpaceX did go public. A SpaceX IPO would be one of the most significant events in stock market history. Investor demand would be overwhelming, likely driving the stock to astronomical valuations. Retail traders, institutions, and even governments would rush to buy shares, seeing SpaceX as a rare opportunity to invest in the future of space exploration. But going public would introduce new pressures. Shareholders expect returns, and the market reacts harshly to delays, failures, and financial stability. SpaceX thrives on rapid iteration, where explosive failures are part of progress. But in a public company, each setback could send stock prices plunging, even when they are expected, leading to lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny. Moreover, Musk would likely implement a dual class share structure to retain control, as he did with Tesla. This would prevent investors from voting him out or interfering with his long term vision. However, it would not eliminate the influence of Wall Street. The need to satisfy shareholders could shift SpaceX's focus from interplanetary colonization to short term profitability, and that shift would damage their pursuit of SpaceX's mission. Furthermore, Regulatory oversight would also increase. SpaceX already operates under strict government contracts, but public ownership would add another layer of scrutiny. National security concerns, antitrust issues, and compliance requirements could complicate decision making. But on the flip side, public markets could provide the stability and the funding that SpaceX needs for its Mars ambitions. Then an IPO could supercharge SpaceX's expansion while still preserving its core mission. The question is whether Musk sees the trade off as worth it, or if he'll continue finding alternative funding sources to keep SpaceX independent. For now, the answer is no. SpaceX operates effectively as a private company, securing billions in private funding while maintaining complete control over its vision. Musk has repeatedly resisted calls for an IPO, citing the dangers of shareholder influence and short term financial pressures. And as long as private investors continue to pour money into the company, there is little reason for him to change course. However, circumstances can shift, and if SpaceX's funding needs outgrow private markets, then an IPO might become unavoidable. Starship development, Mars colonization, and Starlink's expansion all require massive investment. And while SpaceX has navigated these financial challenges so far, a public offering could one day become the only viable path forward. Starlink remains the likeliest compromise. If Musk follows through on his plan to take Starlink public, then it could generate enough capital to sustain SpaceX's most ambitious projects without subjecting the entire company to shareholder demands. This strategy would allow SpaceX to remain independent while still benefiting from public market investment. Ultimately, though, the decision will come down to control. If Musk believes that he can maintain SpaceX's long term focus while going public, then an IPO is likely to happen. But as long as he sees Wall Street as a threat to his vision, then SpaceX will likely remain private, charting its own course toward the future of space exploration. SpaceX's IPO remains one of the biggest unanswered questions in both the space industry and in the stock market. The company has the valuation, the demand, and the ambition to become one of the most valuable public companies in history. Yet for now, it remains private, shielded from the pressures of Wall Street. Musk has made it clear that he prefers it this way. As long as private funding remains available, SpaceX has no urgent need for public markets, and Starlink may eventually IPO, offering a middle ground between private control and public investment. But whether SpaceX itself will ever take that step remains uncertain. But what do you think? Should SpaceX go public, or would an IPO hurt its ability to take big risks? Discuss it down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel for more insights into the space industry. Thank you for watching. With Elenarda, I'm Gene Botkin. End transmission.